Alongside the other kids in public school, I was taught that America is the best, freest, most just country in the whole world. I learned about our constitutional rights to freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and protection against unreasonable search and seizure. Some will say things change during times of war, and we are living in times of war. Since September 11, 2001, the United States government has had unprecedented power to spy on American citizens. In a day and age where technology allows others access to our most intimate moments, that is no laughing matter.
I must be wicked. I haven't rested in days. Yeah, I must be wicked. I haven't rested in days.
Clearly, we are living in dangerous times, and we are walking a precariously thin line between security and freedom. You're probably wondering who I am and why you should care. Fair enough. I'm just a regular guy with an average life who's in a government security database. And you should care, because you might be in one too. That's me, the guy in the hat pushing the stroller. White male, 5'5", 161 pounds, brown hair, hazel eyes, last seen in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Tattoos, arm, back, leg, scars, over the eye, top of the head, left thumb. Known accomplices, a 2-year-old boy who goes by the street name Leo. This is a movie about how I got arrested and spent some time in a secret jail on the island of Manhattan, took on the city of New York and the chief of police, and uncovered a massive police spying operation while fighting for freedom in the most American way possible. By filing a lawsuit.
My head, I hear an echo, something that I said. I hear an echo in my head. I hear an echo, something that I said.
Everyone here is under arrest!
Demonstrations during the Republican convention filled the streets. The police tactics that resulted in 1,821 arrests may soon be filling the courts with orange netting to corral crowds protesting during the convention.
Michael Schiller is one of those arrested, and as a documentary film producer, he and a colleague happened to capture some of that day's protest by the War Resisters League on tape.
This entire group, from that point to that point, is under arrest.
When we learned that he had been caught up in the orange nets and that he had videotape of it, the Civil Liberties Union was quite eager to get a look at it.
Schiller was arrested while filming for a documentary.
He was illegally arrested. He wasn't even protesting.
The city should brace itself for hundreds of lawsuits.
Tonight, a man rounded up by police is going to court. He is suing for false arrest.
We asked the police department for its side of the story. We were told due to pending litigation, there will be no comment.
6 years ago, I was arrested while filming a protest at Ground Zero. The New York Civil Liberties Union filed a lawsuit against the City of New York on my behalf for violation of the First, Fourth, and 14th Amendments of the Constitution of the United States of America.
What are we talking about?
And here we are 6 years later. Any prediction of how much longer this could be in the courts?
Where this all goes back to is December 2006, we were ready to go to trial. The case was basically done in terms of the pretrial proceedings. And at the last minute, the city announced for the first time that they were going to, as a defense in the case, rely on this intelligence operation they had run in which they had spied on political groups. They had sent undercover police officers out to actually attend the meetings, to listen on phone calls, to monitor email. And that particular operation generated a bunch of undercover reports. And there's every reason to think, given what they've been doing, that there are more things happening now that we don't know about, and in many instances may well be doing it illegally. And I think that's all inspired by and kind of justified in terms of the way they see it by 9/11. And, you know, that's just the climate we're living in now.
The right to protest is one of the founding principles of our country. But tonight, some civil rights advocates say the NYPD may have interfered with that right at the 2004 Republican Convention.
The charge stems from NYPD intelligence reports about the convention that were made public for the first time today.
The city, in its own defense, told the judge, when you see our 600 pages of secret intelligence documents, you'll understand why we needed to arrest everyone who was at the protest at Ground Zero that day. The New York City Police Department had been spying, without warrants, on political groups, theater groups, artists, and journalists. Veteran reporter Jim Dwyer wrote the cover story about it for the New York Times.
In the year and a half before the 2004 Republican National Convention, the New York police sent undercover detectives and officers all around the country. They stayed in the homes of some of the people they were surveilling. They ate meals with them. They traveled with them. After 9/11, the NYPD got permission to conduct more aggressive surveillance operations of political groups and other organizations that were involved in what's called First Amendment protected activities. After 9/11, the police commissioner, Ray Kelly, said that the city needed a much more robust intelligence capability than it had because it was clear that the federal agencies had fallen down on the job.
Commissioner Kelly has hired a top 35-year CIA veteran to set up New York's own CIA, complete with officers overseas.
My business is New York City.
One of the things that made this surveillance operation newsworthy was the doctrine that underwrote it. And that was a doctrine described by David Cohen, the head of the Intelligence Division, as seeing a commingled threat in protest, civil disobedience, and terror. With this expanded power and these expanded resources, a lot of information was collected by the police about the activities of people who were not breaking the law.
I decided that I wanted to reach out to some of these groups and talk to some of these people to find out why they were dangerous enough to warrant being tracked by undercover police.
Eyewitness Video has documented the last 3 Republican conventions. And we started it up because there were so many problems with basically mass arrests of demonstrators who often thought they really weren't doing anything wrong. So we had the idea, why don't we use video cameras to try to capture these scenes and basically hold the police to the facts. The videotape allows us to show what really happened. If you look back at the Democratic Convention in Chicago in 1968, there were less than 700 arrests. In the 2004 RNC in New York, the scale was unusual because there were 1,800 arrests. 400 people had their cases dismissed or were acquitted at trial, solely based on video evidence. We went to St. Paul, Minnesota in the summer of 2008 to document the policing of the demonstrations. There's no doubt that we were under a lot of surveillance in St. Paul. A couple of days before the convention, I got a phone call on a Saturday morning at 8:30 in the morning that there were houses that were being raided in Minneapolis. And I was immediately concerned that we might get raided.
There were 3 raids in Minneapolis, 2301 23rd.
I look out the windows and police officers are running past the windows. And our house was surrounded very quickly. We turned on our cameras and waited for them. And we could hear them in other parts of the house kind of kicking in doors. They came down the stairs pointing guns at us.
Come on, with your hands up.
Please. Let me see your hands.
Pointing guns at us.
Come on top of your head, please.
Handcuffed us.
On top of your head, please.
And took us out of the house and put us in the backyard. We didn't know what they were doing in the house. We saw that the search warrant said they were looking for firearms. It also said, though, they were looking for things like cell phones and cell phone chargers and images related to terrorism. The police cannot use a search warrant to seize a journalist's materials. They actually have to get a subpoena for it. They let us go after this without any kind of charges, and they left a receipt that said nothing of value taken. I'm going to guess they copied our computer hard drives and our phones.
Why? Why are they so scared of you?
All we're trying to do is get at the truth. And it seems they're afraid of the truth.
Sidewalk now.
Sir, I want to talk to you.
Do not arrest me.
Go right there. He's under arrest. Stay right there. Back up, back up.
Hey guys, if you cross this line, you'll be under arrest, so don't do it.
Amy, we're going to get you out of here very soon. Yes, we have people.
The police in St. Paul told one of our people that they were using cell phones to track us. And they showed him how they did it. He was sitting in the back of a police car, and they took his phone, and they called our office. And they showed him a map that looked like a Google map. And when one of our people answered the other end of the phone, the address of the office came up on the screen. The NYPD Intelligence Division keeps a database of photographers and filmmakers.
We're here in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, one of the largest Arab populations in the city.
The NYPD publicly stated that we've been infiltrating this particular community and this mosque for years now. Me personally, I definitely know I'm being surveilled. I know that a lot of the community leaders, particularly the most vocal in our community, are people that are on particular lists that we get watched very closely.
I sent you some emails. Do you think that the FBI is reading our emails back and forth to each other?
Absolutely. I'm very careful with my emails and how I write emails. The surveillance and the raids, whether it be through the NYPD, local law enforcement, whether it be from federal agents, or whether it's ICE on an immigration level, hit the streets probably the day after 9/11. This program called the NSEERS program, aka Special Colon Registration, where they were asking for males over the age of 16 that were not American citizens to come and register with immigration. There was a point that I really, in my heart, kind of believed like they were going to put us in like camps. Like that's how scary it was for our community members. They thought they were going to do to us what they did to the Japanese, especially when the Special Colon Registration, they wanted people to register with the government. That's what they did to the Japanese. They told you to come in and register, and then you had like a number and you were fingerprinted. We come from countries where it's police states, so we're very afraid of police. Police to us are the highest law, so people don't understand that that's not how it is in this country. I I mean, our phones, do I think our phones are tapped? Absolutely. I hear like clicking noises. Sometimes I hear like while I'm talking to someone on the phone, like I hear a ringing sound, and people are like, what is that? Are you putting on someone on three-way calling? And I'm like, no, I'm not.
Electronic eavesdropping, undercover agents, secret documents. How on earth did I wind up in the middle of all this?
Back in 2004, I was contacted by a filmmaker who said he was going to be making a movie about the political process, focusing on the conventions. He had connected with Andre 3000 from the band Outkast.
Now this is back when Outkast had a hit at the top of the charts. If you were alive back then, you heard Andre 3000 and Outkast everywhere.
They were going around the country trying to get young people engaged, trying to get the youth vote mobilized, and they were going to be making a get out the vote kind of a movie.
The Last Party series began in 1992 when Bill Clinton ran for president against George Bush.
Governor Clinton, just once, can we ask you one question on the youth vote?
I was approached by some young 20-something kids in Hollywood, and they wanted to do a film with Robert Downey Jr. about how does our generation understand what the political process is, what being a citizen is, what being an activist is, what being involved is, period. In 2000, The Party's Over. That was the sequel. And the idea was to use Philip Seymour Hoffman, obviously a different kind of character, more serious character, to go to the conventions. 2004, Norman Lear has this thing, Declare Yourself. He was going around with an original copy of the Declaration of Independence and trying to speak to people about what citizenship and why they need to be involved in the political process. He had hooked up with the hottest artist of the moment, Andre 3000. Andre was certainly aware that there was this movement. Can we mobilize this new generation, the so-called hip-hop generation? And can they not just buy albums and buy clothes, but can they buy into this political system and express themselves in some way?
I'm just trying to think of ways, to get people out, to register and, to vote. And you put it in the place where they, where they go a lot, so maybe put it in front of a liquor store or, put it in front of a shake club, a nudie bar, or whatever.
I was brought onto the movie as part of the second unit camera crew, filming out in the streets while Andre 3000 was inside with the bigwigs. It was me, John Fine, Dan Levin on sound, Katie Borum, the producer, and Shayna Rigby, the intern. Our assignment was to capture the action in the streets outside of the 04 conventions.
Production of the movie actually began up in Boston, and that's where the Democratic convention was. John Kerry was running against George Bush.
I'm not before, Democrats, I'm not for Republicans. But right now I'm at a place where it's my first time voting, and I'm trying to actually figure out what's the difference, between the elephant and the donkey.
How hard was it for you to admit publicly that you're almost 30 years old and never voted?
Oh, I ain't got no shame.
Okay. All right.
No, not at all. I've actually said on record that, why should I vote? It's like choosing which bullet you're gonna get shot by. I've said it on record before, and I have to retract those words.
I mean, if you run around with a cell phone and a two-way, how you scared of a voting booth? I mean, come on. You two-waying somebody about your braids, about your do-rag, but you can't hit a button or who gonna be the president of the United States?
I think this year I came to realize that you don't vote. If you don't say anything, nothing will happen at all. But if you do, you at least have a chance.
Andre 3000 met Barack Obama on the night that Obama was going to give his keynote address at the Democratic Convention. At that time, Andre 3000 was a much bigger celebrity than Barack Obama.
Big talent.
So,
thank you. I'm glad you dig it.
Absolutely.
He wasn't even a U.S. senator. He was a state senator at that point.
I wasn't one of these guys who was, you know, thinking about being president when I was 7 years old.
Right.
Was real negative about school and got involved in experimenting with drugs. And
no one had heard of Barack Obama before the 2004 Democratic National Convention.
If you don't like what you see going on around you, if it offends something, your sensibility, then for you not to do anything about it is to admit defeat. You know, and I don't like being punked like that.
Next senator from the state of Illinois, Barack Obama.
These truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is the true genius of America.
If it's ever going to be a black president ever, this is going to be the one.
Brother right here.
Yeah, this dude right here.
Where's he from?
Outside of the convention, there was this area under an overpass, surrounded by barbed wire and cages, and they said, this is the only area that you can protest, and we're gonna call it the free speech zone.
The netting that goes over you and the barbed wire was in violation of the First Amendment of the Constitution.
And the plan called for having police horses in here to control the crowd.
This is what fascism looks like! This is what fascism looks like! This is what fascism looks like!
The police arrested a number of protesters for marching and for speaking outside of the free speech zone. Having personally witnessed and filmed protests before, I had never seen anything of this scale in terms of the police presence.
The line has already been drawn. On one side will be 36,000 police, what would be the world's 10th largest army. On the other side will be an estimated 300,000 protesters.
City, there was an atmosphere that there was going to be this intense conflict between protesters and police. The Iraq War had just been launched in 2003. There was a lot of opposition to the war.
Protesters, protesters, protesters.
Is your legal team concerned that you've come up to New York?
Well, actually, my whole team.
The Republicans were really running on this anti-terror platform. I mean, this was why they had chosen New York as a backdrop.
We all remember when the president came to New York City, and when the workers at Ground Zero shouted that they could not hear him, he shouted back, "I can hear you, and the people who knock these buildings down will soon hear from all of us."
This was a few months before the 3rd anniversary of 9/11. Terror alerts were on high.
Our overriding security effort for the Republican National Convention has been aimed at guarding against an act of terrorism.
The list is incomplete, short, not enough. That list can only recognize the DNA that's been identified.
On September 11, 2001, that first tower gets hit, the North Tower. Most people thought it was an accident. Helicopter. Couldn't believe it. 16 minutes later, the second tower gets hit, Tower 2. That's the first tower to fall. Most people were lost on the first floor. 343 firefighters lost their lives. 23 New York City police officers lost their lives. 6 ambulance workers, and 3 of them were driving. They lost their lives. Thousands of people were affected by this, and thousands lost their lives. I remember how everyone just grabbed together, threw down the political fighting, looked at each other, what the hell is this? Because it comes right in your backyard. Like a guy says, it's always been overseas and never bothered me. And it comes home, now you wake up. Now we play big time.
The Sunday before the convention, there was a huge march that went past the convention site. There were 400,000 or 500,000 people who participated in that march.
Went to the UN Plaza, and when we got there, there was a big group of people assembled. The crowd began to march, and we followed it and we filmed it.
Well, we didn't have a permit to march, but we're still marching.
Even though the march was not permitted, the police escorted the march until it got to Madison Square Garden.
It was a peaceful event. It went very well. Unfortunately, things unraveled a couple days later.
We heard about a protest that was going to be happening at Ground Zero.
The plan at the time was for everyone to gather there at Ground Zero, which was used intentionally as a symbolic statement that it was because of the terrorist attack of 9/11 that this war had come about. We were specifically marching in protest of the invasion and occupation of Iraq.
If you obstruct pedestrian or vehicle traffic, I have to inform you, you will be subject to arrest.
Prior to the demonstration, the organizers spoke with police to negotiate a route. They negotiated a route.
Listen to me. Are you going to listen or no? You have to comply with all rules when you're walking through the streets. So when there's a red light, you have to stop.
The NYPD had communicated to us the guidelines that we had to adhere by in order to do the march.
I ask your cooperation so that everybody has a safe march.
I remember saying, I'm gonna go get a wide shot. By this point, the protest had gathered, and the march began to cross the street, and it headed up on the sidewalk towards me. And I remember really clearly thinking, wow, this is the quietest protest I've ever witnessed in my life. So while we were out in the streets filming the protesters, the rest of our film crew was inside Madison Square Garden with the Republicans.
And ladies and gentlemen, if you believe that you must be fierce and relentless and terminate terrorism, then you are the
Terminate terrorism.
George W. Bush, his friends respect him, his enemies fear. When they struck New York Towers, he says, we will not tire, we will not falter, and we will not fail. You know what I mean? They hear, we're going to respond. You will hear from us. Right. And they heard from us.
I was walking backwards and filming, and I had the camera up to my eye, and I pulled it down, and I bumped into a cop. Out of nowhere, the police swarmed in around us with their bicycles and blocked us so no one could leave the sidewalk.
Team behind! Arrest team behind! Point it off all the way down to the block! Everyone here is under arrest!
And then they rolled an orange net around us. I didn't hear any order to disperse. I didn't hear any warning. It was just out of nowhere. Me and the intern were caught inside this orange net.
How you doing?
I'm Jenna. I met you before, actually, at one of your concerts.
I remember.
In Austin?
I remember. We're going to talk about it. How you doing?
Nice to meet you.
All right, pleasure to meet you. So we can
You look very
sit
nice.
down.
I like your shoes.
I like that jacket. That's tough.
Thank you.
What's your favorite food that you eat like every day?
I know what you're gonna say. Let me guess what she's gonna say.
Okay.
Sushi. Mm-hmm. What do you think I'm gonna say?
Cheese.
Beans.
Oh, beans also.
I'm obsessed with black beans.
So you have a lot of protein.
I have a lot of protein.
Over the course of the next couple of hours, 227 people were arrested.
They pulled me out of the net, and they put me in plastic restrainers, and they put me on a city bus.
One of our crew members who was arrested, Michael, got out last night.
All
He's
right.
going to tell us his story. He wants to tell you because Shayna is still behind bars.
Right.
And she's, you know, we're concerned. I mean, this is the third day. Michael, I want you to meet.
So,
come over here, Michael. I want you to kind of, as we walk down, you to describe a little, you know, of what happened.
Shayna Rigby is still in prison. She went in when I did. I got out at 9 o'clock last night. She's still in jail.
Jesus Christ.
They released me at 8 o'clock last night. 28 hours later, Shayna didn't even have an arrest number at 8 o'clock last night. So that means they hadn't even taken her prints and photographs.
Without an arrest number, you do not exist. We believe that there are 500 people who are detained in the basement of that building who do not exist.
My friend is schizophrenic inside. They won't give him his medication. They won't give him his medication. He's crying for 2 days now because he thinks his heart's going to stop.
Explain the situation to both the lady and the press.
We had somebody in our crew. She was actually an intern. It was her first day ever working. And she was documenting what was going on with the protesters. And she was locked up by the police. And we can't find her. And so we're trying to see what's the best way to find her. I think she's been in there, what, 2 days now?
3 days now.
Three days now.
Since these protests started happening, they have not been letting lawyers in. It's against the law. It's denying people their Sixth Amendment right to counsel and their Fifth Amendment right to due process.
When you see that cemetery across the street, that's the cemetery connected to St. Paul's Church, is where George Washington, the original George W., on his inauguration day in 1789, walked down to this church and prayed. People who fought in the Revolutionary War are buried in that cemetery, and that's where we were trapped, between that fence and the police. And I thought about running over that fence, over the dead bodies of our Revolutionary War soldiers who were probably spinning around in their graves, but at that point they brought cops in there. You weren't going anywhere. So we get loaded onto a public bus right there. No one knows where we're going. The bus pulls into a pier, an unmarked pier on I read the street sign, 15th Street and the West Side Highway on the water. Gates open up, the buses roll into this pier.
In advance of the convention, city officials had said that they were prepared to be able to process large numbers of arrests. But it turned out very shortly into the protests that were happening that the city was not prepared at all, or maybe they were intentionally prepared to not be prepared.
We were brought to Guantanamo on the Hudson.
The buses roll into this giant warehouse. They search me, they take everything from me, and they put me through these metal detectors. And then I walk out into this giant area filled with cages built out of chain link fence with razor wire at the top. And there are probably 20 of these cages.
We were forced into pens in a room that was covered in layers of oil and grease and gasoline.
So when people have been sleeping on the ground, their skin has been in contact with this, and so they've been coming down with rashes and other skin problems.
It was close quarters. I mean, it was probably close to like 500 guys in one pen.
We had these peace circles as a way of making a circle so that there was some privacy. And I was able to help the women take their pants down because I was one of the few that could get my cuffs off. And so we were doing this, and we were just basically urinating in different corners of the place.
At around 4 in the morning, they tell us, sit down, keep your hands behind your back, and they put the plastic restrainers on, and I'm put onto this paddy wagon with a bunch of other guys. And by this point, I'm in a lot of pain, so I'm screaming, someone please cut these handcuffs off of me because I can't feel my fucking hand anymore. Eventually the bus makes its way to central booking. We're in the Tombs, which is the infamous Manhattan jail. They handcuffed me to 7 other guys. I ended up in a line that led to where I was fingerprinted and photographed.
The police are not allowed routinely to take your fingerprints when you're arrested for a petty offense, disorderly conduct, parading without a permit. In the age of digital technology, once information is transmitted someplace else, we can't be sure that there's no database sitting with the feds or some other entity of everybody who was arrested during the convention.
I feel like this whole arrest was sponsored by Polaroid because they must have taken like 15 Polaroids of me.
We had to fight our way out of the garden, and once we got out of the garden, there was the perimeter, you know, of security and police everywhere. That was the last I saw.
I think I kind of resented all the protesters just because it was like, if it hadn't been for you, I wouldn't have been here.
I knew that my constitutional rights had been violated, and I wasn't just going to walk away from it. I went through hundreds of hours of our film crew's videotapes, trying to find anything related to the case.
We're the Raging Grannies, and we're here today because we're raging. We're raging at our president for sending our kids to be killed in a senseless war.
And so why are you out here today, sir?
If you had a group of 10 teenage men walking around with guns, in most parts of the world it meant rape and torture and murder.
Fuck you!
Wow. Give me a break, are you nuts? Whenever those 11 young men with guns are U.S. soldiers, they mean food, they mean security, they mean sometimes cigarettes and volleyballs and footballs for these kids to play with. That's what America's all about.
We're looking at weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist, and we're looking at Iraq, who was not involved in 9/11.
As young Republicans, conservatives, we would prefer a more conservative president, but right now we have to do with Bush.
As elephants, as members of the animal kingdom, we cannot, in good conscience, go on being the representative of the Republican Party.
I'm out here because of a lot of problems here. I want my country back.
Lift every voice of everyday people, of ordinary people. That's what democracy is. Democracy is fundamentally about ordinary people lifting every voice. How you doing, my brother? Good God Almighty. I think it's very important for people to understand democracy itself as a way of life, a fundamental orientation, and voting is a moment in lifting one's voice. All we got is our bodies and our voices.
Okay, I see
but we will give value to ourselves in our voices such that the world will have to take note of who we are, even though we're oppressed politically, economically. So that democracy in this sense is more than just a system of governance. We want people to know democracy is not just about government. And the question becomes, how do you take your power back? See, that's what democracy is. How do you take it back? Okay. That's why democracy is really more a verb than a noun, because it's activity. It's an activity.
I gave our videotape of the mass arrest to the New York Civil Liberties Union. They gave it to District Attorney Robert Morgenthau, and it was all over the news. The DA had dropped the cases against me and 226 other people arrested along with me that August afternoon based on our film crew's videotape.
Prosecutors are backing off. During the convention, the protesters were arrested, presumably for breaking the law.
With media that blocks the street will be arrested.
Police were loud during the Republican convention, but not necessarily clear. That, according to Manhattan District Attorney Robert Morgenthau, who decided not to prosecute 227 people who were arrested in Lower Manhattan on August 31st.
So once we got a look at Schiller's videotape, we immediately got in touch with the district attorney after he got a look at the videotape. Every single one of those cases was ultimately dismissed by the district attorney.
By telling the protesters they could have a safe march, albeit under strict limitations, the police likely created the impression among the participants that the march had official sanction. The DA adding that he wouldn't prosecute because it would be difficult to establish that the individual defendants who have been charged were deliberately defying police directives or were intentionally acting in a disorderly manner.
I don't know of any other time in history when the district attorney has looked at 227 cases and dismissed them all outright in one fell swoop. This is really historic and unique in New York history.
Police intelligence documents, 600 pages of which were turned over to civil rights attorneys as part of a lawsuit and made public Wednesday. The NYCLU says these documents represent just one part of the NYPD's surveillance activities before the RNC, and they're asking the city to turn over paperwork on the rest of it.
Our little videotape made a big impact. Criminal cases were dropped. A police spying ring was uncovered. And as it turns out, what was happening in New York was happening all across the country.
You say that specific groups were targeted. What group or groups can you tell us about? U.S. news organizations and reporters and journalists.
The super secret National Security Agency has been eavesdropping, spying on people in this country since 9/11.
The NSA was already estimated to have collected millions of transmissions, emails, and phone calls of average Americans simply by patching into the networks of cooperative telecommunications companies. You will recall the infamous room 641A at the AT&T Folsom Street facility in San Francisco, in which the whole of AT&T's portion of the internet was duplicated inside a room accessible only to the NSA.
The National Security Agency had access to all Americans' communications, faxes, phone calls, and their computer communications, and that it didn't matter whether you were in Kansas, in the middle of the country, and you never made a communication or a foreign communications at all. They monitored all communications.
What happens now? Can the Obama administration stop this?
During the first few months of Barack Obama's presidency, the National Security Agency intercepted private phone calls and email communications made by American citizens beyond the legal limits set by Congress under George Bush.
The trade-off between freedom and security, it's inherent just in the existence of the state. We as citizens have given up some portion of our rights to the government in order for a certain amount of protection and public services and things like that. We start shading into very gray areas when we get towards the other end of the spectrum. Nobody wants a totalitarian state where there's an Orwellian camera in every bedroom and everybody is listened to all the time. Where do we find that balance? We had a fairly comfortable balance, through August of 2001, but since then, most of the past 8-9 years have been really about reestablishing that balance.
Do you think we're creeping towards a society that is totalitarian?
A totalitarian society would fundamentally the terrorists would have won. I mean, that would be correct. The United States as it exists today and has for hundreds of years would cease to exist.
Who's watching? Who's looking out for all this stuff?
So at the top in sort of the intelligence community is what's called the National Counterterrorism Center, called NCTC. In the executive branch close to the president, you have the National Security Council. You have the Counterterrorism Center at CIA. At the State Department, you have the Office of the Coordinator for Counterterrorism. You have the National Security Agency. It's a signals intelligence or electronic intelligence organization, so it collects intelligence from people's phones, from people's computers. The State Department, it has its own intelligence and research bureau. So you have the Defense Intelligence Agency, Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI is the lead, in theory, domestic intelligence agency. So alcohol, tobacco, and firearms can get involved. The Drug Enforcement Agency can get involved. The FBI ends up being fairly reliant on local police as well. So you can see there's a huge array of actors and even multiple actors to coordinate the actions of all these actors.
What's the annual budget?
The most recent numbers I've seen for the overall top-line intelligence community budget was $80 billion.
For a year?
For 1 year.
I'm in their database and they've got my fingerprints and they've got my photograph. Do you think it's something I should be concerned about?
The real question is, how might one get off those databases? There's one that's very specific that's a no-fly list. There's a broader list that's more to people of concern, I guess would be the best way to phrase it. You'll end up with a few reports on somebody that are negative, and so you'll put them on this for what you might call enhanced scrutiny. So that if they start undertaking a pattern activity that looks suspicious, they're at least already flagged so that hey, why is this guy going to all of these different US landmarks? This looks a little suspicious. So that's sort of an enhanced scrutiny level. The more intensive surveillance, domestic surveillance, usually, but doesn't always require some kind of court order. It's not like there's a 0% chance that there might be somebody looking at you, but they do prioritize. And, white Jewish film producers from New York are probably not at the top of the priority list. I mean, nobody's going to show up at your house in the middle of the night, put you on a van, and you're going to disappear, which is not uncommon in a lot of other countries.
Paranoia. Webster defines it as, number 1, a psychosis characterized by systematized delusions of persecution or grandeur. Number 2, a tendency on the part of an individual or group toward excessive or irrational suspiciousness and distrustfulness of others. In the 1960s and 70s, there was a lot of paranoia going around. The police department used informants, wiretaps, agent provocateurs, and undercover officers posing as activists, lawyers, and journalists to create 1 million intelligence files on people involved in political activity. In 1971, there was a lawsuit filed against the city of New York and the police department over surveillance of political activity. In what's known as the Handschuh Agreement, a judge found that it violated constitutional rights to free speech. Since 9/11, domestic spying has made a big comeback. In the era of high technology, surveillance has a whole new meaning. How easy is it for someone to track you using digital technology?
Well, the unique thing about this particular stage of the information age is that it's moving faster than we can control it. Information about you is electronically stored somewhere. There's no avoiding it. Supposing you've never had a computer, right? You might say, oh, I'm not vulnerable. But yes, you are. Your social security information, your credit cards, your bank accounts are electronically stored somewhere.
Supposing you get pulled over, by the time they walk up to your car and ask for your name and driver's license, they already have that info in front of them in the car.
Is every email that I ever sent still out there in cyberspace someplace?
Your emails can be stored in 10 different places with 10 different copies.
What is spyware?
It's like software that is inadvertently installed on your computer. And what it basically does, it lurks in your computer for God knows how long, and it chooses to run at some unknown time and basically does what it says. It's going to spy. If you're going to send out an email, it might piggyback itself on that email to somewhere, or it might transmit data about your computer.
View what you're viewing, be able to see what you're typing in, get into your files without you knowing. I don't know if you've heard of Trojans or worms and all these other kind of infections in the computer. Those type of things are designed to do that. It is very easy for somebody to just hack into what you're doing if you're not taking some steps for security, like a firewall, or using a good browser, or using encryption.
I don't have any of that stuff.
These computers today, they come with some kind of webcam.
These things are enabled by default. For example, this laptop I got, the camera, the webcam was enabled by default. I actually disabled it and had to re-enable it just for this. If I didn't, somebody could have been watching me.
So are you saying that with the right passwords and access, that someone in a government office someplace could spy on me through the webcam in my computer?
That you do for other people, like trying to fix problems.
There's some weird delay happening right now. I don't know if you hear it at all.
You're breaking up too.
I'm breaking up too. Maybe it's the internet connection. Lost you.
Spy store. To spy on you is easy. With the Patriot Act and so on like this, it is much easier. Your phone calls to a party who is under investigation, that can make you part of that investigation. You can be in the barrel also. Your cell phone will be up, your house phone will be up, your computer will be up. This is all tracking equipment. It's past its time. This came out of a surveillance van. This is the older equipment they NYPD would be using in the 70s and 80s. Big equipment, big, bulky, out of date, rendered useless. At one point, these things cost a fortune.
How big would a camera that does the same job be these days?
I mean, there are cameras like this right now. This is a high quality camera right there. $200. This is a GPS unit placed on a car. We'll tell you where that car goes, anywhere in the United States and Canada.
All right, this is live tracking right now. What this does is you put it on the car, any place in the country will tell you right where it is at that given second. There's the address. So you can zoom in on it like this. Has a Google Earth overlay. Tells you how long to stop for and everything. So if somebody's following you, you can say he's right outside this office with the blue flag, because that's what the car is. So if you have a web-enabled phone, you get this right to your cell phone.
You go here to the phone. All you got to do is you go in here, go to someone's address in the address book, hit connect. You got a picture of the front of their house, a 360-degree view of their house. You got a satellite map of where they live. And this is what's commercially available. Here you got Toys R Us for $329.99. It's a camera that's put in your alarm clock and hooks up to your computer so you can spy on the babysitter. We live in a society where privacy is pretty compromised, especially with the technology these days.
If you walk 2 blocks in New York City, you must be on a film 5 times. You're doing nothing wrong. What do you care anyway?
In 1967, Supreme Court Justice Tom Clark said, "There are few threats to liberty greater than that posed by the use of eavesdropping devices." The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act was enacted in 1978 after revelations of domestic spying abuses by the FBI, CIA, and NSA. Warrantless wiretaps of domestic groups were found to be a violation of the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, and FISA laws made it a felony to eavesdrop without a warrant. After the Patriot Act was signed into law in 2001, the FISA laws were amended to make provisions for spying on terrorists.
See, when it comes down to surveillance and the things that they have in order to gather intelligence, because that's what you're doing, you're gathering intelligence, on a particular individual, groups, or location. There are things that we will talk about that's obvious, like GPS, and a cell phone in order to track that. Easy Pass is a microwave that can be tracked. With the technology, you best believe it's being used. Technology have come a long ways where it's not as intrusive.
It's not as intrusive to have someone reading emails as it is to have someone hanging out outside your door.
Right. It's non-intrusive when you don't know. It's intrusive when you do know. And see, that's a delicate line. We have to be intrusive to a certain extent as far as watching everything, what we call, eyes in the sky, because all kind of threats out there. I don't care if it's external from another country or internal, homegrown. Those who would do us harm, they're gonna be here. They're gonna be here. We are more or less enjoying our freedom. Well, that comes with a price. That comes with a price. We're living in a day and time post 9/11. It is a balancing act between a person's civil rights and protecting the peace and keeping order. I want freedom of speech and be able to go and come and do as I please, more or less. But I understand that certain amount of intrusion I must give up in order to be able to enjoy being free.
If you made it this far into this movie, you're probably wondering what became of my lawsuit against the city. After 6 years in the courts, a panel of federal judges ruled that the police could keep their surveillance documents secret. The panel concluded that law enforcement privilege outweighed the need to open the documents to public scrutiny. While the lawsuit continues, we may never know exactly what happened.
I'm a father now, and I feel like I have to be concerned about what kind of country my son is going to grow up in. What kind of America is my son going to know about? He's coming up in a different world than the one that I grew up in. It's something that I think about all the time.
I learned to catch the wind in childhood, shunting my blood to stay in flight. Pressing down.
Someone has to be on the lookout for America. We have to protect ourselves from terrorism, from crime. Surveillance can be used as a legitimate tactic in that fight, and we have dedicated the resources to the job. The problem is how those resources are being used. If surveillance is used to silence free speech and squash political dissent, then the collateral damage from the war on terror is right here at home. It is the very freedom we set out to protect.
Thought by now I'd have found a safe place to land. Promises down below like tiny grains of sand. Oh, thought by now I'd have found a safe place to land. But mankind can be unkind. Time is at hand. I'm ashamed to feel so hungry, but the heart wants to love. I'm ashamed to feel so hungry, down below and up above. But by now I'd have found a safe place to land. Promises down below like tiny grains of sand. Oh, thought by now I'd have found a safe place to land. But mankind can be unkind.
What are you gonna do? What can you do? Me? I just keep the camera rolling. May 1st, 2010. A man attempts to detonate a car bomb in Times Square, half a block from the toy store I took my son to for his second birthday. The vehicle was captured on surveillance cameras. Vigilance, security, safety. Najibullah Zazi was stopped from blowing up the subway I ride daily by undercover agents through the use of surveillance. More cameras in Times. Caught in a drag. We're right in the middle of all this. A cop on every corner, a camera in every living room. Still, I don't feel safe. I don't feel security. I don't feel secure. You see that van? That white van? I see that van every day.
Those who would do us harm.
I mean, nobody's going to show up at your house in the middle of the night, put you on a van, and you're off the street.
Explosives going on in Times Square where I bring my kid to buy his toys on his birthday. Now we have both. That's what we have. We have both of those things. I'm scared.
To spy on you is easy.
I am afraid of what's going to happen. Hey. You're breaking up. I don't know if you can hear.
So it looks like there have been some new developments in the case, which is very exciting. It seems like we might.
Right, let's stop. Dude. Fuck.